on this episode of Postcards.
I said to Harold, my husband, I can't believe it's happened and gone this so well accepted from everybody.
War is hell, and I can admit to that too, yes. Survival is the most important, yeah.
This was our big thing. The community almost wanted to have a museum, so between the two, it just worked out. Beautiful combination.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage-funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.
I was at a chamber meeting, and they brought up the fact that Dawson didn't have anything that we could have so everybody would know, like the ball of twine or the lutefisk or the other towns had. My sister and I went to a shopping trip on a long drive, and so I was telling her this, and so she got to thinking for a while, and she said, you know, she was a librarian here in town, and she said, you know, I've just run across things about the gnome, and she said, I just want you to know every country has them. The Germans have the kobolds, the Norwegians have the nissen, some other countries have leprechauns and, you know, different ones. And she said, I think we should be Gnome Town and have gnomes. Oh, okay.
So I don't remember the exact date, but it's some like 30 years ago. And there's a gentleman in town who was an artist. I'm not an artist, I'm a fabricator. We were both out here in the shop making a gnome. I was making one for fun, and he was making one for Riverfest. And that was Governor Christensen, I believe. He carved a couple gnomes, and then he continued on to carve the annual gnomes until we realized we couldn't have them in the park because the wood would deteriorate sitting outside. So then he switched to making them out of concrete. And if you want to see the original gnomes, they're upstairs in the library. Those are the wooden ones that are the beginning of that tradition.
I became involved with the gnomes at a chamber meeting. Well, I knew a little bit ahead of time because Ruthie Solom had told me about the idea. But when she presented the idea to the chamber, I was like, yes, I want to be part of that. This is going to be fun. This is a good idea to have the gnomes be our representation of our town.
So this is how it migrates from bottom to top. Over the years, over the past probably 20 years, I suppose, I made the 20 gnomes for Riverfest, plus a few others for fun or for the kids or whatever. Yeah. my favorite part, the part I enjoy the most about making the gnomes, is when I get it crafted to the what I think and I'm satisfied with, and is getting it coated, and then figuring out what the colors are going to be, and then the final touch-up. Just getting it done and having it accomplished is the best part. Unusual about these is the trolls have 4 toes, and actually some of the trolls have a tail. I'm not going to put a tail on it. It's more enjoyable to try to do something unusual than it is to try to make it exacting so it looks like somebody. That's about all I know so far.
I just think they're fun. Everyone's different because our music director, he has a wand in his hand. We have ones that are husband and wife that worked at the elevator, and they have, it's like with grain and everything, and we have our basketball coach and his wife, who was the teacher. When we were in high school, he was very instrumental in teaching and in being a basketball coach. AGP has one out there, one with the beans on, you know, because that's important in town. The firefighters, we have one for the firefighters. And the last one was Charlie Prestold. He's been real instrumental and get a lot of business in town. He was our last year's one. My sister wrote the legend, how the gnomes happened to settle in Dawson. They came and they wanted something, so they had a little meeting, all the little gnomes. And everybody has a legend, so they all have a legend. But the first one, my sister wrote this, how they came to Dawson.
They had to decide if they should band together and move across the sea, or if they should simply be no more. The crowd stood in hushed silence as old Torvig, with his brown face wrinkled as a walnut and his pointed hat that was sliding slightly over one eyebrow, came out of the council room to make an announcement.
Whether leprechaun or kobold, pixie or nixes, we will now be called gnomes. We will cross the sea to a place called Minnesota. There we will go to a peaceful city called Dawson. When we get there, we will show them we are neat, helpful, and bring a smile to their faces. To those who have said in years past that we are mischievous, dangerous, and have no heart, we will show we have a heart. We will wear it on our sleeves for all to see, and Dawson will be Gnome Town, Minnesota.
What adventures will they have as they live happily ever after? That's another story.
We had each family of the honoree would write their own legend. One year we honored a couple that didn't have children. And I said, okay, I'm gonna write this for them because they don't have anybody to do it. And I enjoy doing it so much that I've been writing them ever since. And I do have the concept that they're little people and they slide down the hill on walnut shells. And it's been fun. You can really use your imagination when you write a legend about a gnome. Each year we honor somebody. This year it's Dennis and Ruby Anderson. We have a big ceremony. And our artist, Lauren, fabricated this year, in this case, 2 gnomes.
All right, there's Ruby and Dennis in gnome form.
In the beginning of this, there was objection. Oh, they're ugly. The gnomes are ugly. They're satanic. We had one lady say they were satanic. We had to bring a minister in and say, they're okay. It's just like Santa Claus. They're just fantasy. So we had that struggle at the very beginning. And what it's done for Dawson, it's gotten us a lot of attention.
Every once in a while we're driving around and I see the gnome here and a gnome there and like this sign that I just saw that's got a gnome on it. I said to Harold, my husband, I can't believe it's happened and gone this so well accepted from everybody.
My name is Robert M. Millsaps. I was born in East Tennessee on a farm in the second day of January 2019. I was 95. We live in Lake Little now. I've been there almost 16 years, yeah. Of course, my wife passed away the 14th of December 2016 after 71 years. We got married after we came back from Germany. In Maryville, Tennessee, which is about 7 or 8 miles south of Knoxville. I don't remember the girl I was with that time, but I had my date in there. And the girl that I knew before I went to Germany, I don't know how she saw me, and I didn't realize she was in the world anymore. And my girl that I used to know sent this girl in and tapped me on the shoulder, says, "Is your name Mac Millsaps?" I looked up and I said, "Yes, honey, what can I do for you?" And she says, "There's someone outside wants to talk to you." So I excused myself from my date. Went out and talked to this girl that I knew before I went to the army. I said, "Who was that come in and got me?" And she told me her name and everything. I said, "Where does she work?" "She works at a drugstore, so-and-so." The next night, I was sitting at the counter having a milkshake. We've been together ever since. When I was drafted, I was 19 years old. And when I went over to Germany, I was 20. One soldier was leaning against that door. When the operator opened that door, he fell and went tumbling down, but he didn't get hurt. But there's another sergeant out on my left was getting off, and he got hit by the German. He went down dead. Later on, I don't recall the months exactly, but I got hit in my cottage belt with a bullet, and that bullet landed in my cottage belt, and I found it later. Then next time we was waiting in the hedgerows for advancement, and an artillery shell cut in, a piece about an inch and a quarter, hit my canteen, and that thing went inside of my canteen, and it knocked that canteen against my hip. I knew I was hurt because so we got up and started moving, and that July water run down my leg, and I knew it was my blood. And of course I had to turn my thing in and get me a new canteen. Then the next time I got hit, I was following one of our tanks. I was right behind it and just happened to glance around up there about 100, 150 feet, and the German stepped out behind a building up there with a bazooka. He let loose that bazooka and hit that tank right in the back, and that splattered on me, and 3 little pieces of tin went right through my shirt into my chest. It did not bring blood, And I don't know why it didn't, but those times, 3 times, I remember very things, get hit by those things. I did not get the Purple Heart. I wasn't looking for it. I just kept moving. My platoon sergeant, he was going in this big building in the door one time, a shell came over and came down on his head, and he lost half of his head. And of course, me, PFC, private first class, I don't know why they picked me out of 12 more men, and they promoted me to sergeant, and 10 days later, they give me another promotion. Then they wanted me to take over my squad, which I had no choice, I did. But the scariest I ever was in my life in military, they signed me to take 3 of my men out to try to find out where the Germans were. And I was, no lights, no smoking, nothing. We went out through the woods, started out through the woods. Didn't know where I was going to. Never been there before in my life. We went probably 500 feet, and I heard German tanks coming in. And I thought, uh-oh. They're heading my way or which way. So we turned and came back and reported to the command at these tanks, and they had, our tanks and their tanks had a battle that night. And I shouldn't say it, but I was glad they did because I don't know where I was going. Maybe I would have never got back. Is hell, and I can admit to that too, yes. Survival is the most important, yeah. Don't get up and shake your head and try to tell somebody that says, I'm not afraid of that. But I have slept in many foxholes. Many of the foxholes. I do remember a lot of things that I went through, but I think I have had a pretty good life considering, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I consider myself pretty lucky, I guess.
This room is an accumulation of all knickknacks and old business pencils, calendars, and what have you. The biggest attraction is the projector from the old Grand Theater from across the street. It's put in there in the 1930s and existed till about early 1960s. There's still a couple of the projection operators around. Roger Perkins was one of them, and he wrote a detailed story of it that everybody seems to enjoy and read. That's all odds and ends. Here's an old butter box, flat irons, old church plates, pencils, a whole cigar box full of pencils, one real old phone, and the next step up was this dial one. And all these old calendars came in from out of nowhere, dating way back into the 1930s. When you look at the trophy, it says Dawson 63, opponents 0.
Ethel Mellum started dressing dolls when she was a child, and this became a hobby that just expanded. At the point where she left her home before she went into the nursing home, and they auctioned, some went to the museum and some were auctioned, she had 480 dolls displayed in her home.
This is the famous vault that we centered the interior decoration around. April 1930, a couple of thugs came to town and they looked the town over. They came in here and cashed a $20 bill, looked around. Next day they came back.
Walked in that front door, up those very steps that you walked down when you came in, with guns, robbed the bank.
There were 8 people in here, employees plus a couple of patrons. They made them lay on the floor, ransacked through all the drawers, got what they wanted. When they did, why, they herded them all, 8 of them, into the vault.
And there was no light, and it was airtight. So they locked the vault door and left.
Slammed the door, out the back door, and nobody ever heard from them since.
Now the people in the vault quickly was losing, and it's not very big, and they were quickly losing air to breathe. Finally, a customer came in and the bank president yelled, "Help, help, we're in here. I'll give you the combination, you open the lock." Well, whoever was out there hadn't opened a bank vault door and didn't know how, it tried. Then they said, we're having trouble breathing. Go run and get the president of the other bank. He'll know how to open it. And that's what happened. So after that, they installed a vent. If it ever happened again, they would at least have air to breathe. So there's a vent there that's still there. The story goes is they escaped without anybody seeing them. The crime was never solved in a time frame that's normal. In fact, it was only solved 2 or 3 years ago. And it was solved by a lady rummaging through her uncle who had just died, rummaging through his things, and she found an interesting book there. A book that said, "How I Made My Living, I Robbed Banks." Well, he didn't write the book, but he read the book. And inside the book were sketches of banks, one of which is Dawson. So that's how it was solved, just a couple years ago.
First, the baby in Dawson born was Helmer Carlson, and of course, from the day he was born until he passed away, his nickname was Dawson. Nobody knew him by anything else. This is what we call the Veterans Room. We're dedicated to World War II and World War I and Korean veterans. At one time I was up to a fellow's house that was making model airplanes for a hobby and had them hanging all over the ceiling. And I said, well, gee, I remember a guy who used to fly a P-38 and another one that flew a F-4U Kozar. He said, well, he says, maybe you want them up at the museum. So yeah, I took those 2 planes and we hung them up here. And then we found the families that were connected to them. This is the reason this building got renovated. This is Steve's safari room. Steve was our son, and he'd been to Africa 5 different times. Steve was a real congenial person, well-liked, He was just a great person to have around, and these trips to Africa was a real big thing for him. He had a terminal illness that lasted for about 7 years, and this gave him something to have on his mind. He was always ready to visit and tell stories about Africa. So when this opportunity that we could make a permanent memory of him, this was our big thing. And of course, the community always wanted to have a museum, so between the two, it just worked out a beautiful combination.
As we were working it, people started coming through and telling stories about being in here. One guy said, my grandpa said the Ku Klux Klan met upstairs. Another person said, well, I went to a birthday party when somebody lived upstairs. Just different stories. It's our own. We always have felt we were part of the Lac qui Parle Museum, the county one. We like having our own. It's a smaller one, but more personal to us. I would just hope that people are really interested in coming to see the things in it. People that have come in it have been pleasantly surprised.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.